Hey nerds, Farmer Jesse here. So today we are excited to be continuing our series of videos with my co-founder here at No-Till Growers, Jackson Roulette. This week he's discussing how to work with church land, including how his specific lease works and some of the potential benefits. Collectively, churches are some of the biggest landowners in the United States, and so we hope this video will help provide folks and organizations a roadmap, or at least a model, for how to work with churches, or for churches to work with farmers, to start using any extra land to produce food for local communities. Real quick, you can support our work by picking up a copy of the Living Soil Handbook or a hat at no-tillgrowers.com, or by joining us on Patreon at patreon.com/no-tillgrowers. That all helps to keep our work going and growing, so we thank you. Otherwise, here's Jackson of Apostles Garden at Holy Apostles Orthodox Church in Bowling Green, Kentucky.
Yeah, we should have done this one in the morning before onion harvest. Really want to get into like the real income potential of a market garden, or this specific market garden. I do think it would be a good idea to contextualize this situation here at Apostles Garden a little more, just to understand it fully. So I lease this land from my church, approximately 2 acres that we lease, only about a ½ acre under cultivation, as well as exclusive use of this lean-to, which doubles as my pack shed and tool storage, as well as the barn. The barn does have water and electricity, which I pay for the usage above and beyond the historical average. It's easy to track and easy to calculate. The TLDR is that several years ago I'd sold a farm. Many reasons. So we moved into town to work on growers full time. And we thought we would find land within a year, but after about 2.5 to 3 years, we still weren't able to find anything suitable. So we approached our church about using some of their underutilized assets, namely this barn, the utilities out here, and this field out back, because this property is right here in town as well. It's about 10 minutes from our home, 5 minutes from our market, in exchange for essentially tithing 10% of the gross sales from the garden. That's not net, that's gross. Soon, members are going to be able to take extra produce from the garden, mainly what is left over after a Saturday market, or anything that is in overproduction, be it from my generosity or my poor crop planning. They can decide. For a donation to the church, be it more than they would normally pay otherwise, or nothing at all, that's not something that we're interested in. I just don't want to see this composted. I don't want to see the produce or my hard work go to the compost. Our small Orthodox church is rapidly growing, and we're working on ways to bring in additional revenue from outside of the church for a future building project. May it be so. All of that to say, it seemed like a good fit both for us and for the church. So our lease is pretty simple and straightforward. It was in large part inspired by some of the sections found in the Farmers Land Trust Toolkit, specifically their shared values and their lease templates. I'll put a link down here. They've also got templates for creating legitimate farm commons and can provide support for anybody interested in doing so. Look, if you're looking for a place to start, if you have land and want to see it farmed, or if you're a farmer looking for an alternative model to access land, Farmers Land Trust is a great place to start. It is without a doubt my favorite agricultural organization or institution ever. And I've got a super rad conversation with them coming up on Collab Farm next month, so look out for that. Yeah, so if we like that commons model so much, why didn't we go with it? We didn't create a commons model because everyone involved here is familiar with one another. You know, I've gone to church with these folks for several years now. We've developed a good amount of trust and communication. So in that way, we wanted to keep it simple and straightforward. 2, it's something that we could pursue later should we want this garden to continue after we move on from here. It's not something that we had to do to start the garden in the first place. Essentially, the highlights of our lease are that we're on a 3-year rolling term, so each year the lease automatically renews for an additional 3 years. If the church wants to reclaim the field, that gives us a minimum of 3 years to find a farm and fully transition onto that land, which we feel like is ample time. Coincidentally, we did find land and a farm opportunity about a year after starting this garden. Joke's on us. Which will be an even more collaborative project, but we're going to save the details about that, Lord willing. It's going to be an awful lot of work. Obviously, were we to discontinue this garden, we would put the land back into its original state, removing all of the stuff out here and putting everything back into grasses and red clover like it was. Conversely, if we stop farming here ourselves, our rent is 10% of our gross sales. So if we're not selling, we're not paying rent. So that's something that'll be helpful for us, as we transition in the future. This is not our forever garden home. And, when we do pull back from or discontinue our working on it, we are still thinking of ways to keep this garden going so that it still benefits the church and the rest of the community, right? And that could be sharing ownership with a current or future employee, sharing the care and production with other growers in the area. I've talked to others about doing storage crops out here for multiple farms or growing seed lots. So keeping it in production. We're still in the establishment phase. We've just not got that far in figuring out what the future of this garden is just yet. There is a clause that we should, so long as we're the leaseholders, keep this place clean and presentable. So, we can't just leave our tools out in the field. At the end of a long, hot day, we can't let this get overgrown. We truly want to keep it looking nice because we are in part representing the church here. So we did get, we did splurge on a good, reliable zero-turn mower just to make sure that we keep the area around the garden looking nice and neat. Say when you have 100 of your friends and acquaintances looking at your garden every single week, there's quite an incentive to keep it looking clean. And this is hands down the tidiest garden I've ever worked in. Keeping it clean and neat and organized for the most part is just good for morale. My own, the people that work here, the parishioners that wander out into the garden on Sunday afternoons. But that doesn't mean we also don't have our junk piles. We just keep them hidden in sort of a hedgerow. Speaking of junk piles, we're also required to carry insurance in case something were to happen to an employee, volunteer, wandering parishioner. We don't want accidents to happen, but in case they do, we have a $100,000 policy. We spend about $300 a year on that. I do have to get permission to make any permanent changes to the land or to the barn or to install permanent infrastructure like a true in-ground high tunnel bearing water lines or electric lines. Fortunately, here in Zone 7, we can get by with four-season production with just Caterpillar tunnels and row cover for the most part. Running all of our irrigation lines over the ground, just making sure they're drained every now and then, and not having electricity or heat out in the field. We can still maintain adequate four-season production. And just like when I made my original proposal to the church for the garden, I do have to submit visual and written proposals to justify all the work. As a leaseholder, I interact with the church through their parish council. So essentially you can think of it like a board of elected and or appointed members of the body of the church that make day-to-day operating decisions about the church, so long as they don't result in any heresies. So in a way, the garden is in part governed by a board. One important distinction I want to make here is that these are two separate entities. While the garden does have a mission-driven purpose, namely to support the church and raise money while providing its members and the greater community with well-grown food, right? We do not operate it as a ministry of the church. We are a business that specifically leases space from the church. So this separates our work from that of the church. Good fences make good neighbors, right? We set it up in that manner because it creates very clear boundaries. If this were a distinct ministry of the church, they would understandably have, more of a hand in making decisions about the garden, particularly financial ones, but also like what is grown, where it's grown, who does the work. That's not necessarily a bad thing, but in this particular case, we opted out of that community garden model. I remember driving by many of the churches around COVID time. Remember that? Many of them started substantial gardens and they're no longer there. It takes a significant amount of time and expertise and not a small amount of money. I think I showed that in a previous video, to grow a lot of food in a small space efficiently. And by efficiently, I mean making it worth the time, the blood, sweat, and tears, and honestly, the money invested. I'm a professional with 10 years experience. At least I hope I'm a professional at this point, if I'm a professional at anything. I think that I've earned a level of trust. That means that I don't have to check with them about the thousands of small decisions that are made to make the garden function every week. When I first proposed the idea to the parish council, they asked what I thought about the idea of growing just a big pumpkin patch. And that's where shared values and being clear about the mission comes in, because I said if the goal is to raise money for the church, that's the opposite direction we need to go. In part because I'm the market garden world's most terrible cucurbit grower. But, also that's not a way that I see is profitable, at least not for my tool set and not for the assets that the church had. What I really wanted to say was we could burn my money on the spot. But I didn't want to quite be so blunt with it. So having them as separate entities also means that the church doesn't have to invest any of its time or money or volunteer labor into the garden for it to fulfill its agreed upon purpose. This garden has the freedom to be run like a business. It pays for my time, mostly. We're getting there. It has a part-time employee. We have our own crop plan based on years of market experience, a built-in customer base, financial and production goals. I do submit quarterly reports to the parish council just to keep them up to date with what's going on. But in this way, it can support itself without relying on the limited resources or ongoing attention of the church. By being financially independent, the garden can use the proceeds to benefit the church and those in need this year and next year, and hopefully years to come without interruption or much involvement. And also, the garden's right freaking there. It's right outside of the fellowship hall for anyone who just wants to get involved. And that's a huge opportunity for situating a garden inside of a community, especially, a faith-based one. One time I truly put out a call for help, after the tornado, remember that? Gracefully deconstructed our caterpillar tunnels. Several of the folks stayed after and helped me break down the biggest game of pickup sticks I've ever played. And then several more came out after that to help me rebuild when the new tunnels arrived, not to mention the ongoing weekly emotional support that I got from the church that we received in the process, and everyone else for that matter. One parishioner and friend managed an entire GoFundMe for us to cover the expenses. I think what I'm trying to say is that a garden can, provide plenty of opportunities for fellowship, which is sorely needed right now. I love sitting around talking over a cup of coffee, pitcher of beer, just like the next guy. But, I've found over the last several years of my life and my experience that relationships are truly strengthened when you're doing meaningful work alongside one another, especially struggling alongside others. So in a way, I feel like there are several opportunities for fellowship throughout the growing season that a garden can provide, like storage care at harvest, garlic planting, putting up a tunnel. But the way that we've set it up, it's an invitation rather than a requirement just to meet the ends of or the needs of the garden. And that dynamic is both something the church and I feel more comfortable with. As a person of faith, trying to figure out how it should inform all aspects of my life, but especially my farming, or thinking about how churches should re-engage directly with stewarding creation, which we're called to do. I do think about a quote from Mr. Barry often, and that's, "To live, we must daily break the body and shed the blood of creation." When we do this knowingly, lovingly, skillfully, reverently, it is a sacrament, and when we do it ignorantly, greedily, clumsily, destructively, it is a desecration. And in such desecration, we condemn ourselves to spiritual and moral loneliness and others to want. I think I'll just leave that there for y'all to think about. But that's a good note to end on.
All right, how awesome was that? Would love to see more churches opening up their land to small farms like this. Very cool stuff. And if you have some examples that you know of, please share them below in the comments. Huge shout out to Jackson for these videos and all of it. It really would not be an nth of what it is without him. Speaking of, if you enjoy our work, please consider picking up a copy of the Living Soil Handbook or other merch at no-tillgrowers.com. That really does help us to afford all the podcasts and videos and everything that we do. Become a Patreon member at patreon.com/no-tillgrowers to get some discounts on stuff, or just hit that super thanks button. That works too. Like this video if you like this video. If you are not subscribed to this channel, hit the subscribe button, and if you are subscribed, you're awesome. Otherwise, thanks for watching. We'll see you later. Bye.
Whew. This onion smell off of me.